Have you ever wondered why you fall in love with certain people and not others? Why do you feel that instantaneous connection with some strangers, while other people, even being attractive or interesting, do not wake up in you or the slightest spark? The answer could surprise you. According to the renowned psychologist Carl Jung, there are only two fundamental reasons why we fall in love. One of them will lead you to the deepest happiness that you have ever experienced, while the other will destroy your heart over and over again, trapping in an endless cycle of painful and failed relationships. Love, that enigmatic force that has inspired countless poems, songs, and works of art throughout human history, could actually be much more predictable than you imagine. The fascinating thing is that most of us fell in love with the wrong reason, and then we wonder why our relationships end in suffering. Stay with me until the end of this video, because I will reveal exactly what these two reasons that determine who you fall in love, how to identify if you are falling into the trap of destructive love, and most importantly, how to attract true love that will last a lifetime. The theme that we will explore today touches the most intimate fiber of our existence. Love is not simply a passing emotion or a biological whim for reproduction. It goes much further. It is a deep reflection of our psyche, our most hidden wounds, and our most secret yearnings. Carl Jung, one of the brightest psychologists of the 20th century, dedicated much of his life to understanding this phenomenon that we all experience, but few really understand. Jung's vision about love breaks with the romantic clichés that have sold us since childhood. It is not simply to find your half-orange or that perfect person who will magically complement your life. The reality is much more complex, and in a way, much more fascinating. Jung discovered that love is intimately linked to our unconscious, to those parts of ourselves that we do not recognize or do not want to see. It is there where the true transforming power of love lies, but also its destructive capacity when we do not understand its mechanisms. Think for a moment in your own love story. Have you noticed patterns that are repeated? Have you wondered why you are still attracted to the same type of person, even when you know that it will hurt you? Or maybe you have questioned why that relationship that seemed perfect at the beginning ended up becoming a nightmare. The answer is in those two fundamental reasons that Jung identified, and that today we are going to unravel together. What you are about to discover could change your way of seeing relationships forever. Not only will it help you understand your past experiences, but it will give you the tools to create a conscious and full love future. Because love, when it is correctly understood, can be the most healthy and transformative force in our life. Before, completely immersed in the two reasons why we fall in love according to Jung, it is important to understand the context of his thinking. Carl Gustav Jung was not an idealistic romantic. He was an acute observer of the human psyche who saw beyond appearances. For him, love was not something that simply happens to us, as if we were passive victims of Cupid and his arrows. Actually, it is ourselves who unconsciously choose who to fall in love with. Current society has sold us a vision of love based on rapid consumption of emotions. They have made us believe that love is that intense feeling of euphoria that we experience at the beginning of a relationship, that phase of falling in love where everything seems perfect. But Jung understood that this is just the surface of something much deeper. For him, true love begins precisely when that initial phase ends, when the projection begins to fade and we really begin to see the other person. This is where we enter the territory of the first reason we fell in love, the projection. The projection occurs when we see in another person aspects of ourselves that we do not recognize consciously. Our unconscious recognizes in the other something familiar, something that belongs to us, but we have kept in the shadow. Imagine this. Each of us carries an internal mirror inside. When we know someone and feel that immediate attraction, that inexplicable chemistry, what is really happening is that we are seeing our own reflection in that person. But not any reflection. We are seeing parts of ourselves that we have repressed or that we have not fully developed. For example, a person who has repressed his creative and spontaneous side can feel irresistibly attracted to someone who freely expresses these qualities. An individual who has denied his vulnerability can fall in love with someone who openly shows his emotions. What we really love in these cases is not the other person itself, but what that person represents for us, the lost parts of our own being. This initial projection can feel pure magic. Suddenly, we find someone who seems to complete perfectly, who has exactly what we lack. It is as if we had found the missing piece of our personal puzzle, and this feeling is incredibly powerful and addictive. However, this is where the danger begins, because when we fall in love with the projection of our own qualities in another person, we are not really loving that person. We are loving an image, a fantasy that we have created about it. And sooner or later, reality will begin to leak through this fantasy. Think about the last time you fell in love intensely. Do you remember how you saw that person at the beginning? You probably idealized it. You noticed all its positive and minimized aspects, or directly ignored its defects. Maybe even your friends told you that you were blind at certain alarm signs, but you couldn't or didn't want to see them. This is exactly what Jung described as the power of projection in love. The painful truth is that many relationships fail precisely when the projection begins to fade. When we started seeing the other person as it is, with their real virtues and defects and not as we had imagined, this is a critical moment in any relationship. Some flee in search of a new person on which to project their fantasies, falling into an endless cycle of intense crush followed by bitter disappointments. Others stay, but live in a constant state of resentment because the other person is not the one who thought it was. But there is a third option, which Jung considered the way to true love. Withdraw the projection and start seeing and loving the real person in front of him. This is a difficult and often painful process, but it is the only way to an authentic and lasting relationship. The second reason we fell in love, according to Jung, is even deeper and potentially more destructive. Animus and animus. These terms may sound technical, but represent a fascinating concept that we all experience unconsciously. Jung believed that each man carries within himself a female element, the anima, and each woman carries a male element, the animus. These are archetypal images formed throughout our evolutionary and personal history, strongly influenced by our first relationships, especially with our parents of the opposite sex. When a man falls in love with a woman who seems to fit perfectly with her internal image of the anima, or when a woman finds a man who faithfully represents her internal animus, the attraction can be irresistible. It is as if we had found the physical manifestation of our ideal image of the opposite sex. This is the reason why we are often attracted to people who resemble our parents in certain aspects, or who treat us with similar ways to how they did. Our anima, or animus, was largely formed during our childhood, molded by these parental figures and cultural messages about what it means to be a man or woman. The problem arises when this internal image is distorted by wounds or emotional deficiencies of our childhood. A man who had an emotionally distant mother can unconsciously find similar women, hoping to finally obtain the love he did not receive in his childhood. A woman who grew up with a critical father can be attracted to men who constantly judge her, in an unconscious attempt to fix that original dynamic and finally obtain the approval he longs for. This type of attraction based on children's wounds is precisely what can break our hearts over and over again. We fall in love looking to heal, but we end up recreating exactly the same painful patterns we try to overcome. There is a revealing phrase that says, "We fall in love with who makes us feel how we feel with ourselves." If you have a low self-esteem or unconsciously believe that you do not deserve to be loved fully, you will feel strangely comfortable and at home with someone who treats you with the same contempt or indifference with which you treat yourself. This is the most dangerous trap of love. We are attracted precisely by the people who confirm our negative vision of ourselves, because the familiar, even if it is painful, always feels more certain than the unknown. It is as if a part of us thought, "At least I know what to expect from this pain. It is the pain that I know." Jung observed this phenomenon again and again in his patients, intelligent and capable people who continued choosing couples who mistreat them or made them feel insignificant. Men and women who repeated the same destructive patterns in each new relationship, wondering why love always brought them suffering instead of joy. The answer, according to Jung, is that these people are not really related to other human beings. They are being related to projections of their own psyche, with internal images distorted by pain. They do not see the real person in front of them. Come to a character in his own internal drama. To better illustrate this concept, let me tell you an ancient story that Jung used to refer. The legend of the silent walker and the lost traveler. Tell the story that there was a traveler who had lost in the mountains for days. Hungry, thirsty, and on the verge of despair, he saw in the distance a lonely figure that slowly walked along a path. With the few forces they had left, he ran towards the stranger. "Please help me," the traveler begged. "I am lost, I'm hungry and thirst. I need to find the way back to the village." The silent walker looked at him with deep and compassionate eyes, but said nothing. He simply continued on his way, indicating with a gesture to the traveler who followed him. Frustrated by the lack of verbal response, but without another option, the traveler followed him. During his way together, the traveler did not stop talking, projecting in the silent stranger all his hopes and fears. "Surely you are a wise hermit," he said in a moment. "You have come specifically to rescue me because fate has wanted it." The silent walker did not confirm or denied anything. He just kept walking. Later, when they crossed a particularly difficult section, the traveler changed his perception. "Now I see that you are a demon of the mountains," he accused with fear. "You are taking me to a trap to finish with me." Again, the walker did not respond, but continued his immutable path. Finally, they reached the village. Before separating, the traveler, confused by the attitude of his guide, asked, "Who are you really? A savior angel? A misleading demon? Why didn't you tell me anything during the whole way?" The silent walker finally spoke. "I am neither an angel nor a demon. I am simply a walker like you. I did not speak because it was not necessary. Everything you have seen in me, the angel, the demon, the wise, the deceiver, were nothing more than projections of your own being. I am just a mirror that has allowed you to see the different facets of yourself." This story perfectly illustrates what Jung meant about the projection in love. The person we fell in love is, in many ways, like the silent walker for us. We project our hopes, fears, desires, and wounds in it. And then we react not to the real person, but before our own projection. But how can we break this destructive cycle? How can we fall in love with projections to experience an authentic love based on reality? The answer begins with a process that Jung called individuation, the path to the integration of all parts of our being, including those that we have repressed or denied. Only when we begin to recognize and accept all our internal facets, we can stop desperately projecting them on others. This process requires self-knowledge and brutal honesty with oneself. It requires asking us, what am I really looking for in the other? What parts of myself am I trying to find or heal through this relationship? Am I seeing the real person or just a projection of my own needs? The answers to these questions are rarely comfortable, but they are the way to the liberation of destructive patterns in love. And this is where the first reason we fall in love comes into play, the reason that can lead to true happiness instead of repetitive suffering. Jung discovered that there is a type of love that is not based on the lack or wound projection, but on recognition and resonance. This love occurs when two people who have done a significant work of self-knowledge are and recognize each other, not as saviors or as solutions to their problems, but as travel companions in the path of life. This type of love does not begin with the burning intensity of the projection, but with something more subtle and deep, a feeling of familiarity that does not come from reviving old wounds, but of recognizing in the other and related spirit. It is not the feeling of this person completes me, but rather this person reflects me and helps me grow. To better understand this difference, allow me to share with you another story, that of Elena and Miguel. Elena had gone through several intense but destructive relationships. She was always attracted to charismatic but emotionally unavailable men who made her feel special at the beginning, just to ignore her or belittle her later. After his last particularly painful break, he decided to take time to herself and explore these patterns with the help of therapy. During this period of introspection, Elena discovered that he had grown up with a brilliant but distant father, whose approval always yearned but rarely received. He realized that he had been unconsciously looking to recreate that dynamic in his romantic relationships, always fighting for the attention and validation of men who, like his father, were unable to fully give it to him. This discovery was painful but liberating. Elena began working to heal that internal wound, learning to validate herself instead of desperately looking for the approval of others. Gradually, he developed a stronger relationship with herself and began to integrate those qualities of strength and autonomy that she had always admired in the men she chose. A year later, Elena met Miguel in a photography workshop, a hobby that had resumed as part of her self-discovery process. Miguel was not the kind of man who normally attracted him. It was quiet and reflective, not charismatic and dominant. At first, he barely noticed, but over time, while working together in various photographic projects, Elena began appreciating Miguel's depth and authenticity. I did not feel with him that instant and intense spark that he had confused with love in the past. Instead, he experienced a gradual but constant sensation of comfort, respect, and genuine connection. The most surprising thing for Elena was that for the first time, she did not feel the need to constantly impress or please her partner. It could be herself with Miguel, with all her imperfections and vulnerabilities. And instead of feeling anxious or insecure, as in his previous relationships, he felt safe and in peace. This story perfectly illustrates the difference between the two reasons to fall in love that Jung identified. Elena's first relations were based on the projection of her children's wounds and the unconscious search to heal her relationship with her father. His connection with Miguel, on the other hand, arose from a place of greater internal completeness. He did not look for what was missing, but he recognized and appreciated who he really was. This is the paradox that Jung discovered about true love. We can only experience it when we no longer need it desperately. Only when we have stopped looking. In others, the lost parts of ourselves, we can see them and love them as they are. Most of us have grown up with the romantic idea that true love is the one in which we find our half-orange, that person who completes us. But Jung offers us a radically different perspective. True love is only possible between two people who already feel complete for themselves. This does not mean that we should be perfect before we can love or be loved. The completeness to which Jung referred to is not perfection, but integrity. The ability to recognize, accept, and integrate all the facets of our being, even those that we consider defective or unacceptable. When we achieve this level of self, knowledge, and self-acceptance, something magical occurs in our relationships. We no longer project our shadows or our wounds in others. We no longer look desperately abroad what we lack inside. Instead, we approach others from a place of genuine curiosity and openness. We don't ask, "What can you give me?" but "Who are you really?" And here we reach the essence of the two reasons why we fall in love according to Jung. We fall in love with projection, looking for the other, the lost parts of ourselves. This love, although intense, is based on an illusion and eventually causes suffering when reality does not coincide with our projection. We fall in love with recognition, connecting with someone from a place of greater internal completeness. This love develops gradually and is based on seeing the other as it is, not as a projection of our needs. So how can we cultivate this second type of love, which leads us to lasting happiness instead of repetitive suffering? Jung offers us several keys that remain deeply relevant today. The first and most important is the commitment to our own individual process, the trip to the integration of all the parts of our being. This process implies a double movement: inward, to meet more deeply, and out, to relate more authentically to others and the world. The trip inward requires courage and honesty. It implies facing our shadows, those parts of ourselves that we have repressed or denied because we consider them unacceptable. It can be our anger, our vulnerability, our inappropriate desires, our deep insecurities. Jung believed that these shadows, when they remain unconscious, are precisely what we project more intensely in our relationships. For example, a person who denies his own aggressiveness can be constantly surrounded by aggressive people. An individual who represses his sexuality can feel overwhelmed by the sexual expressions of others. What we do not recognize in ourselves, we see it amplified in others. Work with the shadow implies asking, what characteristics of others bother me more intensely? What kind of people cause me disproportionate emotional reactions? These intense reactions are usually clues that point to our own unrecognized shadows. By identifying and gradually integrating these rejected parts of ourselves, we reduce our tendency to projection. We begin to see others more clearly, not as screens where we project our own unconscious content, but as separated beings with their own complexities. The second key aspect is the healing of our early emotional wounds, especially those related to attachment and love. We all carry internal relationship models formed in our childhood. If we grew up with parents who made us feel safe, valued, and loved unconditionally, we probably develop an internal relationship based on trust and security. But if our early experiences were marked by abandonment, constant criticism, overprotection, or emotional negligence, our internal model will be very different. We can have learned that love is unstable or conditional, that we must win it through specific achievements or behaviors, or that it inevitably entails pain and disappointment. These internal models powerfully influence our adult relationships, often without being aware of it. They lead us to repeat family patterns, even when these patterns cause us suffering. The good news is that these internal models can be modified through new corrective emotional experiences. Therapy can be a safe space to explore and transform these patterns, but any relationship where we experience a different type of love, safer, more acceptor, more authentic, can help us rewrite these internal scripts. The third aspect that Jung emphasized is the differentiation between oneself and the other. In immature relationships, there is a tendency to fusion, to lose the boundaries between the self and the couple. This fusion can feel intensely romantic at the beginning, but eventually becomes suffocating and limiting. Maduro love, according to Jung, implies the ability to maintain a clear sense of oneself, even in the deepest intimacy. It is to say, I am me, you are you, and we chose each other, instead of you are my other half, without you I am incomplete. This type of love requires respecting both individuality and the other. It implies recognizing that we can never completely possess another person or fuse totally with her. There will always be aspects of the other that will remain mysterious to us, and that is not only fine, it is part of the beauty and mystery of love. The fourth key that Jung offers us is the understanding that true love is not static, but dynamic. It is not a state that we reach and maintain forever, but a continuous process of death and rebirth. The relationship we had yesterday is not exactly the same as we have today, because both we and our partner are constantly evolving. This means that love requires continuous disposition to release old ways of relating and creating new ones. It requires flexibility, adaptability, and a constant will to see the other with fresh eyes, not through the filter of our past expectations or experiences. This is where many relationships fail. When one or both members of the couple insist on maintaining a fixed image of the other, resisting to recognize and adapt to their changes and growth, love stagnates. As Jung pointed out, where there is stagnation, there is death. Finally, Jung emphasized the importance of what he called work of the soul in relationships. This implies seeing the relationship not only as a source of personal satisfaction or happiness, but as a vehicle for mutual growth and spiritual evolution. From this perspective, conflicts and difficulties in a relationship are not necessarily signs that something is bad, but opportunities for greater self, knowledge, and growth. Each friction, every misunderstanding, every moment of disappointment can be an invitation to look more deeply, both within oneself and towards the other. This does not mean, of course, that we must remain in abusive or deeply unsatisfactory relationships in the name of spiritual growth. Jung was very clear that self-esteem or denial of our legitimate needs does not lead to healthy development. But it does mean that we can address the inevitable challenges of love with an attitude of curiosity and openness, asking us, what can I learn here? What is showing me this situation about myself and on the other? All these keys, work with, The shadow, the healing of emotional wounds, healthy differentiation, the understanding of love as a dynamic process and the work of the soul lead us to what Jung considered true love, a relationship where two individuals help each other to become their most full and authentic beings. This vision of love is beautifully captured in the words of the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, whom Jung deeply admired. Love consists of this, that two solitudes are protected, touched, and greet each other. Even among the most intimate human beings, a distance remains, and that is beautiful. Because only respect for this distance allows each one to grow according to their own law. Now that we have explored the two fundamental reasons we fell in love according to Jung, and the keys to cultivating a more conscious and satisfying love, it is time to ask ourselves, how can we apply this wisdom to our daily lives? How can we transform the way we love and are loved? The first step is to develop greater awareness about our attraction patterns. The next time you feel that intense spark towards someone, that arrow that seems to arise from nowhere, hold for a moment and ask yourself, what am I really seeing in this person? Can you attract me for who it really is, or for what it represents? For me, am I projecting in it any unrecognized part of myself? This self-indictment is not intended to eliminate the magic of falling in love, but to add a dimension of consciousness that can avoid a lot of future suffering. Because when we fall in love from the unconscious projection, we are starting a clock that will inevitably sound when reality breaks our illusion. The second step implies a commitment to our own personal growth, regardless of whether or not we are in a relationship. Many people put their development in pause when they find a partner, as if the ultimate goal of all internal work was simply getting someone. But from the Jungian perspective, internal work never ends, and in fact, becomes even more important within an intimate relationship. If you are currently in a relationship, ask yourself, what parts of myself am I avoiding facing when concentrating on the defects or deficiencies of my partner? What personal responsibility am I evading when I blame my partner for my dissatisfactions? Am I using this relationship as a hiding place of my own unrealized potential? And if you are not in a relationship at this time, this is a perfect opportunity to focus on your individuation process without the distractions and projections that often accompany romantic relationships. You can ask yourself, what parts of myself do I need to integrate before getting involved with another person? What old emotional wounds can I start healing now? How can I develop a fuller and more satisfactory relationship with myself? The third step is to practice the conscious withdrawal of projections in all our relationships, not just the romantics. Every time you are judging someone intensely, feeling an attraction or disproportionate repulsion, or attributing intentions to the actions of others without sufficient evidence, consider the possibility of being projecting. A simple but powerful practice is to ask you, if this characteristic that I see so clearly in the other was actually an unrecognized part of myself, what part would it be? Where and how is it manifested in my own life? For example, if you deeply irritate you, the arrogance of a colleague, ask yourself if there are situations in which you yourself exhibit similar behaviors, or if you have repressed your own confidence and assertiveness. If you feel intensely attracted by the freedom and authenticity of someone, consider whether these are qualities that you have sacrificed in your own life and long to recover. These reflections can be uncomfortable, but they are tremendously liberating. As we retire our projections, we begin to see others more clearly and interact with them from a more authentic place. The fourth step is to transform our relationship with desire and lack in love. Most of us have learned to associate love with yearning, with the feeling of desperately need another person. But Jung invites us to consider a radically different form of loving, not from lack but from fullness. This type of love does not say, I need you to be happy, but I am happy, and I choose to share my happiness with you. He does not say without, you I am incomplete, but I am complete in myself, and since that completeness I choose to create something new with you. This transformation does not happen overnight. It is the result of a gradual process of self-realization and personality development. But every step we take in this direction brings us closer to the possibility of experiencing a love that nourishes instead of draining, which frees instead of catching, which expands instead of limiting. The fifth and last step that I want to share with you today is to learn to discriminate between the two types of falling in love we have explored. Because the truth is that both can feel intensely real and convincing at the moment. Falling in, love based on unconscious projection, and the search for healing children's wounds is usually characterized by an immediate and intense, almost obsessive attraction. The feeling that the other person is perfect, or exactly what I have always sought. A feeling of despair or urgency, as if this were our last chance for love. Repetitive patterns that reflect dynamics of our early relationships. Intense, emotional, ups and downs alternating between euphoria and anguish. A tendency to idealize the other at the beginning, eventually followed by a bitter disappointment. On the other hand, falling in love based on mutual recognition and shared growth usually shows these characteristics, an attraction that can start subtly and grow over time. The ability to see the other as a complex individual, with virtues and defects, a feeling of calm and security instead of desperate urgency. New patterns that represent healthier relationship possibilities, an emotional stability that allows vulnerability without drama. A realistic but loving appreciation of the other, which can be deepened over time instead of fading. By learning to recognize these differences, we can begin to make more aware choices in our relationships. We can choose to nurture connections that promise authentic growth, and let those that simply repeat old painful patterns. And here is the final paradox that Jung offers us. The less we desperately need love, the more capable we are experiencing it in its deepest and transformative form. The more complete we are in ourselves, the more we can connect with others. The less we use relationships as an escape from our own shadows, the more they can become sacred spaces where two human beings are in their most authentic truth. This understanding of love goes far beyond the romantic cliches with which we have grown up. It is not a perfect fusion fantasy where two incomplete people become magically a totality. It is a much more difficult but infinitely more rewarding path. The path of two beings that, on their trip to their own integrity, choose to walk together, helping each other to become more fully in who they really are. As Jung said, the encounter of two personalities is like the contact between two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. This mutual transformation, not completeness, not salvation, not the evasion of our own internal challenges, is the true gift of love. So, while you reflect on the two fundamental reasons we fell in love according to Jung, I invite you to ask you, what kind of love do you want to be a participant in your life? Who is based on unconscious projections and old wounds, or the one that arises from mutual recognition and shared growth? The choice, as always, is yours. But now, armed with this deeper understanding of the mechanisms of love, you have the power to choose more aware. And in that consciousness lies the possibility of a way of loving that not only makes you temporarily happy, but also contributes to your growth and flowering as an integral human being. Remember, true love is not something we find outside in another person. It is something that we cultivate first within ourselves and then we learn to share. It is not a magical solution for our wounds and deficiencies, but a sacred space where two imperfect but complete beings choose to accompany each other on the trip of life. And in that mutual accompaniment, in that delicate dance of approach and distance, of knowledge and mystery, of vulnerability and strength, we discover not only the true face of the other, but also, and perhaps more importantly, our own authentic face. So the next time you feel that attraction, that spark that could become love, hold a moment. Breathe deeply and ask yourself, am I seeing the real person in front of me, or am I seeing a projection of my own unattached needs? Am I looking outside what I lack inside, or am I offering from a place of relative completeness and authenticity? The answer to these questions could determine if you are embarking on another love cycle based on the illusion that will eventually break your heart, or if you are opening the door to the possibility of a more conscious, more real, and more transformative love. And if you discover that you are still operating mainly from the first type of falling, do not discourage. The simple fact of being aware of these mechanisms is already a great step towards their transformation. As Jung reminds us, until you do the unconscious, you will direct your life and call it destiny. By conscious the unconscious forces that have been guiding your love elections, you begin to free yourself from the compulsion to repeat. You begin to create a new destiny, one in which love is a conscious choice and not a neurotic compulsion, a liberation force and not prison. This is the gift that Jung offers us, the understanding that love, like everything really valuable in you, life is not something that simply happens to us by chance or destiny. It is something we consciously cultivate, with effort, courage, and dedication. It is an art and a practice, not just a feeling or a kind of destiny. And the good news is that it is never too late to learn this art, to transform our way of loving and be loved. Every moment of consciousness is a new beginning. Each insight is a change seed. Each act of courage to honestly look at our projections and patterns is a step towards a more authentic and satisfying love. So I invite you, as of today, to observe your love patterns with new eyes, to ask you what you are really looking for when you feel attracted to someone, to consider which ancient wounds you could be trying to heal through your relationships, and above all, to begin the trip of developing a fuller and more authentic relationship with yourself, knowing that this is the fertile floor that a truly transformative love can sprout. Because in the end, the two reasons why we fall in love, according to Jung, the unconscious projection and conscious recognition, represent two very different paths in life. One keeps us trapped in compulsive repetitions of old painful patterns, while the other invites us to a continuous evolution towards greater integrity and authenticity. The choice between these two paths is not something we do only once, but a continuous process of surveillance and self-knowledge. Every day, each relationship, each encounter offers us the opportunity to choose again: projection or consciousness, repetition or evolution, love based on lack or love based on fullness. And while you navigate these elections, always remember that you are not alone. We are all on this trip together, learning and growing, sometimes stumbling, but always with the possibility of getting up and choosing again, with greater wisdom and compassion towards ourselves and others. Because that is perhaps the final lesson that Jung offers us about love, that in its highest form, it is not only a personal feeling or a relationship between two individuals, but a force that connects us with all humanity, with life itself, in all its manifestations. It is the recognition that beyond our apparent differences and separations, we share a common essence, a common yearning, a common destiny. And in that recognition, we find not only the love for a particular person, but a way of being in the I, world that is impregnated with love, compassion, respect for the uniqueness and mystery of each being that we find in our path. So, while you reflect on the two reasons why we fall in love, I invite you to expand your gaze, to consider not only how you can transform your romantic relationships, but how you can bring this deepest understanding of love to all aspects of your life, to your friends, your family, your work, your relationship with nature and with the world in general. Because love, in its broadest and most deep sense, is not just something we experience in our intimate relationships. It is a way of being and being in the world. It is the ability to see beyond appearances and separations, to recognize shared humanity on each face we find, to respond to life not from fear or lack, but from generosity and fullness. And when we begin to live from this place, we discover that love is not something that we must desperately look outside, but an inexhaustible source that flows from us. It is not an award that we won or lose based on our worth or deserving, but our essential nature, our birthright. This understanding does not eliminate the challenges and complexities of human love, with all its vulnerabilities and risks, but it offers us a broader perspective from which to address these challenges, a perspective that allows us to love not from despair or fear of loneliness, but from freedom and conscious choice. And in that freedom we find, paradoxically, a more deep and true form of connection than any merger based on dependence or projection. We find the possibility of a love that honors both our individuality and our interconnection, both our uniqueness and our shared destiny. This is the gift that Carl Jung offers us, with his deep understanding of why we fall in love. the possibility of transforming not only our personal relationships, but our relationship with life itself, the possibility of living not as desperate love seekers, but as living expressions of love itself. Because in the end, perhaps the deepest truth that Jung discovered is that love is not simply something that we find or lose, give or receive. It is something that we are in our most authentic essence, and all our human journey, with its lights and shadows, their encounters and farewells, its moments of deep connection and its necessary periods of loneliness. It is a long and beautiful process of remembering this truth, of awakening who we really are. So I leave you with this final invitation. While you continue exploring the 2 reasons why you fall in love, while observing your patterns and working on your own individuation process, always keep in your heart the broader vision towards which Jung pointed out, the vision of a humanity that has awakened from the illusion of separation and has remembered his innate ability for a conscious, generous, and transformative love. Because that awakening, that memory, begins with each of us, with each act of self-knowledge, with each choice to see beyond our projections, with every moment of loving not from need or lack, but from the fullness of our being.